her father raised a garden. Now, my mama nearly idolized her father and would go with him the distance from their house to this garden spot, which was a good ways off. This required that they push a wagon with wooden wheels past their neighbor's house. My mama was terrified of the old woman that lived beside them. And Mama said that they called her Aunt Kate. She was older, and apparently she had cataracts because Mama said that her eyes were white. She said that this particular summer had been extremely hot, and that she and her father had spent a good bit of time at the garden, tending the vegetables and picking what was ready. As they pushed this big wagon up and in front of Aunt Kate's house, the old woman came out and yelled, quote, "Harrison, who is my great-grandfather, give me some of the beans that you got there," unquote. My great-grandfather responded with, quote, "Kate, we worked hard for the beans, and we ain't giving them away," unquote. The old woman laughed and told them that they would regret their decision. If you remember from my intro, apparently there are witches in the Appalachian Mountains. The two proceeded up the hill to their home and went about chores and other required duties. Mama said that she thought nothing more of it until it was time to go to sleep. According to my mama, with so many kids, some of them shared the bed and some of them were on the floor, and they slept with minimal coverings. Mama said that she was drifting off to sleep when she heard someone or something walk towards the room where they were sleeping. And knowing the sounds of their home, she did not recognize who or what it could be. Mama always talked about how her father would tell them stories to scare them into being good. And due to this, she was easily scared. As the walking got closer, she reported covering her head and laying still, terrified of who or what was standing in her doorway. She reported that, quote, "whatever it was would turn and walk out of the room and back down the hallway," unquote. And it did this all night long. Mama said that she laid there all night, terrified and scared to take her head out from under the blanket. The next morning, as the sun rose, whatever this thing was stopped. She said that she heard the familiar sound of her father moving quickly to dress. And once she boasted enough bravery, she immediately darted down the hallway and into the kitchen where her father was placing green beans into a sack. The two lights that we used for hunting, so we weren't in total darkness. And we made it almost all the way across before we started running. And then we ended up walking another 6 miles to the nearest road that would take us back home, because we were not going to go back across it. Holy moly, that was the most scared I have ever been. And the hair on my arms is standing up just thinking about it. Okay. Okay. So, privately owned campground located in the Greater Yellowstone region. Is Yellowstone part of the Appalachian Mountains? Yellowstone is in like Montana, right? Shoot. I don't know U.S. geography that well. I'm just gonna read it anyway. I'm not gonna look it up. Anyhow, I checked in, met the dude running the spot. He was really laid back, really down to earth, and even gave me updated accommodations, which was glamping instead of my campsite, for free. Anyhow, we connected pretty well. I felt comfortable around him and safe at his spot, which is important as I mostly travel solo. Well, we started chatting one morning and he was telling me how he spent some 2 to 3 months. Oh, okay. So he was telling me how he had spent 2 to 3 months on the Appalachian Trail, starting in Georgia and moving up north. Okay. I'm glad that's cleared up for myself. I don't remember how it was brought up, but he begins telling me how one day he found a cut off the trail, an old carriage road or something, and that it was pretty quiet. There were not many Appalachian hikers. Not many Appalachian hikers go off onto this portion, he claimed. Anyhow, I like how this person says anyhow a lot. He starts telling me how one day he is hiking and begins hearing branches or twigs breaking off trail to his side. Breaking off the trail to his side. And being the only one there, he suspects it's an animal. According to him, he sets up camp that night and begins hearing the same noises around his campsite. Well, he begins to get pretty sketched, and he decides that he'll rest quickly and then get back on the trail. Morning comes, and he hits the trail again, but he begins hearing the same noises. He begins telling me how he starts to get a little sketched at this point. He seemed pretty legit, and he was even getting emotional. were still hanging. And every time I ran past that house, I got a weird vision of a woman. I envisioned that she was recently married, picking out those curtains, having a family and a life in that house, and everyone dying before her, and her just sitting in a chair, thinking wistfully of the past while staring at the curtains and the broken window. That's so sad. One day while I was passing, I stopped and I sent a mental wish of goodwill to that energy. strange noise at night. The next morning, my boyfriend asked me if I had heard the noises too, and neither of us could figure out what it could have been, and it didn't show back up the second night that we stayed. Don't make noises at night. Don't whistle. Don't sing. Don't talk. Don't yell. You do not know what is listening. I am going to retitle the video A Collection of Unwritten Rule Breakers in the Appalachian Mountains. I grew up in the mountains, and I recall plenty of situations where I felt as though I was being stalked or watched. Granted, I lived in the deeper part of the mountains. Strange sounds, fleeting figures, and shadows out of the ordinary. I feel like a lot of folks who don't experience stuff usually only hang around the official trails. But I am convinced that there's something out there. Something that my family, who are also lifelong residents, and I refuse to discuss. Here we go. The most important thing, supernatural or not, when the forest gets quiet, you get down. Don't move, don't speak, and leave when it's safe. The forest gets quiet when predators are around. It doesn't matter the form. It's good advice. What was I just gonna say? It's good advice. Okay. So this didn't happen on a trail, but in a trail down during a section hike in CT/MA. The weather turned bad, and my buddy and I headed into Great Barrington. We got a room at a cheap motel. I can't remember the name. At one point in the night, I wake up to see that someone has opened the window and insurance fraud scheme. Oh my god. The dude was 3 times my size, and we were getting pretty sick of one another when the snow finally let up. He just kept getting madder and madder and madder about completely random shit, including my ineptitude at cribbage. And as soon as the snow let up and we got home, I moved out. Oh, that's terrifying. I don't remember where I was, but it was probably Tennessee. I decided to set up camp in a clearing, camping alone for the first time. I didn't start in Georgia. I had been out for only a few weeks. I decided that I wanted to see the stars, so I slept without my rain fly on. At about 11 p.m., I heard footsteps on the trail, and I thought, thank God, someone is gonna camp with me. I kept my eyes closed, trying to sleep. Kept my eyes closed, trying to sleep while I listened to them. I heard them stop closer and closer. I thought, okay, they are checking out my tent. No big deal. I am sure that they'll be setting up soon. Again, they get closer and closer. I keep my eyes closed, but I start to get anxious at how close they are getting. And a few seconds later, I feel something prod my feet from outside the tent. I shot up and I made a grunt, and it booked it away from me. I grabbed my flashlight, but I was clumsy and it got away. Whatever it was, its footsteps were pretty heavy. It had enough force to poke my foot like a hand would, and whatever illusion I saw in the shadows scampering away looked at least as big as a large dog. Needless to say, the rest of the night I slept with my arms crossed, bear spray in hand, and flashlight in the other. I have so much respect for people who can do these journeys by themselves. Like, I've heard stories of women doing like 3-4 month long hikes on the Appalachian Trail, and I don't know, I would not have the courage to do that. To be all alone, to know I don't have any help if I run into people or animals. My hat goes off to you if you do this sort of journey, because I don't know, I can imagine how rewarding and how beautiful of an experience it would be, but I would not survive. Nope, I wouldn't even be able to start. So cheers to you if you've done something like this. Okay. I have experienced missing time on the Appalachian Trail. It's a long is running around looking for me. He's up there with Eric. He's not alone, but he's running around looking for me. At first we saw what looked like a large cat, about the size of a mountain lion, but it was running through the woods on 2 feet. We drove as fast as we could to get to the next town, which was called Clearfield, Tennessee. When you get into the town, there's a street light on either side of the street at the city limit sign. The lights looked like they were floating back and forth across the road and switching places. As we drove through the town, we saw 2 men putting what looked like a body bag into the back of a van. At this point, I floored it, and I found the first open gas station that I could to get directions back. I still have no idea what we saw or why, and we were stone cold sober. And while it was late, we frequently stayed up that late, so I doubt it could have been sleep deprivation. That's scary. I feel like if I saw somebody putting what I assume to be a body bag into a vehicle, I don't know if I would floor it away, because I wouldn't want to bring any attention to myself. I would want to just